Thank you. All right. Hi, everybody. Happy CU Data Week. My name is Laura Grau, and I've been planning CU Data Week, which is almost over, sadly. We've had various events this week. If you don't mind going to the next slide, Camille. We've had quite a few talks this week, from basic statistics using R or SAS, creating cool figures, analysis workflow using Git, Python, and Jupyter. Last night, we had a really exciting talk about intro to microbiome data, and now we're working with a statistician. We're super excited to have Camille and Sarah here. We had quite a few talks earlier last year about, what does it mean to actually work with a statistician? What's like a good working relationship between a collaborator, an investigator, and a biostatistician. So we're very excited y'all are here to listen to this talk, and I'll hand it off to Camille and Sarah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for being here. I hope you all have something delicious for lunch and are ready to learn about working with a biostatistician. So I'm going to start out with a poll just to get an idea of who's in the audience. So if you could fill it out, we'd love to know who's here. And hopefully we picked good categories.
Should I fill it out, Camille, just to see if it works? I'm going to fill it out.
I'll give it just a few more seconds to give people a moment to choose their fate. All right, so I'm kind of interested in who falls under the other category. If anyone's brave enough to either write in the chat or unmute themselves and kind of introduce themselves and let us know, it would be really helpful to know kind of where you're coming from and why you're here today. Oh, I'll end the poll so we can all see. Anyone? You can put it in the chat. No brave souls. That's okay. So we'll go ahead and let me see if I can. Oh, I'm new to polls, so we're learning. Oh, did someone put in the chat? Visiting Scholar Department of Epi. Awesome. Thanks for being here today. I hope that this applies a lot to people in epidemiology as well. So the goals of our talk today we have 4 goals. So first, we want to discuss the different models of statistical support. We want to talk about how to find a statistician and then how to nurture a relationship with them. And then we are hoping that both statisticians and non-statisticians will be able to get something out of our talk today. So for non-statisticians, we hope that you can understand when and how to include a statistician in your research team. And then for statisticians, we hope that you're able to understand your responsibilities and goals as a statistician. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah.
All right. So as Camille said, this talk has relevant aspects for both biostatisticians and non-statisticians. And the ways that you think about some of these things might actually depend on how far along you are in your career. So some of the slides that I'll be giving, I actually developed specifically to give the statistician perspective to non-statisticians. I was talking to a group of clinical collaborators, but I think anyone can kind of pull what's relevant for themselves in their own work out of these slides. So I kind of tend to lump biostat support into these 3 general categories. So team science, statistical collaboration, and statistical consulting. I'm going to focus on collaboration versus consulting. Team science is kind of like a bigger version of collaboration, and we can definitely talk about it later if there's time and interest at the end of the talk as well. And you can go ahead if you want, Camille. So I guess, first of all, when I gave this talk previously, I had asked clinicians on campus what collaboration versus consulting means to them. And some of the answers I got are collaboration means working together as a team from the start. Consulting is coming in to answer a specific and limited question. Another person said, for collaboration, I think of working long-term with a biostatistician. I think of consulting as a one-time event. Another person says, collaboration, the biostatistician takes more ownership of the analysis. Consulting, the biostatistician is only involved in a small piece of the research analysis. So collaboration is more like an ongoing relationship, whereas consulting sounds a little bit more transactional. So those are some of the answers that I got from clinical collaborators, but I pretty much agree with those answers. So I think of it this way. I think of consulting as a bit more of a one-off model. So it's often more fee for service, maybe a little bit more hourly based. Collaboration is more of an ongoing, mutually rewarding relationship between some sort of principal investigator and statistician that kind of encompasses all stages, or more stages at least, of the scientific process. And I wouldn't necessarily say that one option is necessarily better than the other, but one might be best based on the specifics of a given scenario. So for example, consulting is a great option if you have a short-term project with a fixed amount of work and like really well-defined endpoints or a really well-defined goal for the project. So a short-term project, maybe if you have data that needs to be analyzed to be embedded in a larger grant application, or sometimes manuscript analyses can really fall under this consulting realm. Consulting can also provide guidance on developing a longer-term relationship with a statistician. And then, like I said before, consulting often comes with an hourly payment rather than bringing a statistician on for any kind of FTE. But if you are really looking for a long-term relationship with a statistician, then consulting is probably only going to get you so far. I think the main drawback of consulting is that the statistician may not be involved through the entire length of the project. So it can sometimes be difficult when a statistician is analyzing the data that they didn't really play a role in collecting. You know, maybe there's some kind of issue with the study design that the statistician maybe would have had a different idea at the beginning of the study if they were involved at that point. From the perspective of a statistician, I personally really enjoy both consulting and collaboration, but I see them as having really different goals. You know, collaboration is I've really developed this relationship with someone, it's ongoing. I'm really more of a life cycle person throughout the project. From the non-statistician perspective, it really depends on your needs. You know, so if you really just kind of need something that's a little more fixed, then consulting might meet your needs. I would say a couple things to avoid are, I call them 5-minute questions or bless this analysis. Like if you come up to someone and say, hey, I just have a 5-minute question. First of all, that 5-minute questions don't exist. I've never been able to answer anything in 5 minutes, as you can see, as I like to talk. And then the bless this analysis is just when someone wants you to look at their code or their output and just tell them if they did it right. And honestly, you know, I'd have to do something from the ground up to really say whether I think it's, you know, valid or not. So those are the things to watch out for, that it's not really a consulting. It's but there can be a lot of appropriate uses of a consultant where you can get what you need statistically as well. So I think we can go on to the next slide, Camille. And so this is a poll question. We were just kind of curious, and our response options might not be mutually exclusive, but we are kind of curious what other people had experienced either as a statistician or with a statistician. So if you've tended to consult more, tended to collaborate more, if you've engaged in both consultation and collaboration, or if neither of them are at really the point that you're at yet. I guess I should answer so that my screen goes away. And Camille's driving, so you'll have to let me know when we get responses in, Camille.
Yeah, we've gotten about 70% of the room responding. So
all right, we'll give it another 10 seconds and then.
Oh, we got one more. Someone snuck in there at the last moment.
All right, let's see what we have here.
Okay.
Okay, so it looks like we kind of have a good, wow, this is like the most beautiful distribution of responses I've ever seen. We've got a little bit of everything. So here, it looks like some people have had one or the other, some have had both, and some have neither. So cool. All right, I think we can go on. Yeah, and this is, you know, just thinking from the biostatistician perspective, this is a question that I posed to a group of biostatisticians totally not scientifically valid survey that I did. But I compiled the results into a word cloud. And so the question was, what's your ideal collaboration? And you can see words like team, included, beginning, expertise, all of those things kind of came out as big things. A couple key quotes from that. Someone said, the best projects are one where I'm included as a true member of the team. This doesn't necessarily mean I was looped in on every email, but I was included and allowed to actively participate at all stages and see drafts of papers before we're about to submit, and can you give your blessing stage kind of thing. Another said, biostats team included at the beginning of project makes for fewer problems down the road, and I feel much more like a respected member of the collaborative team. So those are just a couple of examples. We can go on to Camille then, I think, for the next slides. That segues into what she's going to chat about.
Yes, so I feel like my Zoom controls are always in the way. Okay, so next we wanted to dive into, when maybe it's time to find a statistical consultant or collaborator. So I think one thing that people don't necessarily know about statisticians is that we're really trained to help you with the entire study process. We are trained in study design, we are trained in data management, we are trained in doing the different types of analyses. So we really have the skills to help you take your study from the idea stage all the way through to the final manuscripts. And so that's something to think about, is when you might just have a study design question, and that is something that a statistician can help you with. And we like to help you with, because that we can help you set your study up for success so that you can actually answer the research question that you have. A lot of times people come to us when they need a power analysis. This is a pretty common one, but when you're trying to figure out how many subjects or samples that you are going to need to collect. And another thing we can help you with kind of in this context is how many groups you should compare. So this might be in the context of your study design for figuring out what is the most appropriate grouping, and then also based on your sample size. So sometimes you have kind of like your ideal number of groups that you want to compare, but based on how many people you are practically able to gather for your data, this might change a little bit. Another time to come to us is when you are coming up upon a method or a type of data that you haven't worked with before. We know that a lot of people have kind of a basic statistics understanding, which is awesome because we're statisticians and we want to spread the knowledge. But there are often times where you might run into something you've never worked with before. And that's a really good time to find a statistician, either to consult with us and ask us kind of questions, or even to call upon us to actually, if we have expertise in that method or that type of data, we can actually help you do the analysis. We often have collaborators come to us when they have a lot of data. So anyone pulling data from Compass, for example, you probably have a very large amount of data in a relational data set. So what that means is that your data probably are in different pieces amongst different data sets that are all connected through some sort of identifier. And statisticians are experts in being able to handle these types of relational data sets databases to help you create an analysis set, help you figure out where are the different components that you need to answer your research question, things like this. The other thing is we are statisticians, we are big nerds and we love to learn new things and we love to keep up on the latest methods for design and analysis. So if you want to be using really like the latest methods, that's a great time to find a statistician because we are always learning, we're attending conferences and doing webinars and all of that kind of stuff. So when you want to use the latest methods, that's a great time to call in a statistician. And so all of this advice comes from this ASA document, which is called When You Consult a Statistician, What to Expect, which I really love this document and I linked it below. But I wanted to pull out this quote quickly from that, which is, when you consult a statistician, you enlist the help of a professional who is particularly skilled at solving research problems. The statistician will try to guide you to the best way to obtain an answer to your research questions. And so just kind of pointing out that we're not only doing the analysis, we're not only doing the numbers, we really are skilled at solving the research problem anywhere along that pipeline. So on campus here at CU, there are a couple of different places that you can find a statistician. The first place I would recommend looking is your department.
So sometimes there is a statistician that has an agreement with different departments. For example, or division, especially in the Department of Medicine, which is so huge. So I have an agreement with the Division of Gastroenterology. And so there are a lot of collaborators that I have in that group that come to me through that resource. So it's always great to check to see if your department has a statistician that works with them. The next place to look would be to ask your collaborators or your mentors. So your collaborators might have worked with a statistician in the past that they know has expertise in the research project you're working on or something like that. And likewise, your mentor might have that kind of connection as well. On campus, there are 4 main groups that provide statistical support. So the first one is Accords, which is kind of the health services and outcomes research support. CETA is the second one. So I'm housed in CETA, as is Sarah, and we're the hosts of Data Week, I guess. But so CETA, it tends to be more general. So kind of anyone who doesn't fall into these other buckets, CETA, we have a really wide range of expertise, anything from like bioinformatics and microbiome data to clinical trials to EHR data. We really kind of cover the whole spectrum, whereas Accords, Children's RI, and the Cancer Center are more specific, or like have a more specific focus rather. So Children's RI, if you are doing PEDS related research, I believe that they provide support for this. So I was like, I don't know if I want to go on the record saying this, but I'm pretty sure it's free for a lot of collaborators. Someone can correct me. And then the Cancer Center does have the same rates as CETA, but there is a discount for collaborators that are associated with the Cancer Center. So if you're doing cancer related research, that's a really good place to go. So just a couple of little tips here. So the general statistical knowledge that you might have works fine. But sometimes you really need to find a statistician with specific expertise. So that's where you might, if you are doing cancer related research, it's a really good idea to go check out their resource because they have statisticians who are specifically trained in methods for your type of research, for example. If you are doing kind of genomics research, we have statisticians at CETA who are specifically trained in the methods that are necessary for processing and analyzing those types of data. So sometimes it's really helpful to go look for an expert in the specific method that you're trying to apply to your data. And kind of a general reminder that statisticians, we are math nerds, but we do not know everything about numbers. And there are a lot of different fields that dabble in numbers. There are epidemiologists, there are engineers. So there's a lot of different methods across the spectrum. So I would say, don't expect your statistician to know everything there ever was to know about numbers. And like other professionals, we do not work for free. So please be prepared to pay for our services rather. Unless even if your department has an agreement, your department is paying a statistician to provide you statistical support. So it's not a free service. We are professionals like everyone else. We have bills to pay like everyone else. So you should be prepared to pay for a statistician. This next list is, what to look for in a statistician. So obviously you want them to have a good handle and knowledge of statistics. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, is someone who's up to date with current literature. So someone who is up to date with kind of the current methods being used, especially if you're in a specific clinical field. My favorite thing about being a statistician, and I think one of the most important things, is that you find a statistician who asks lots of questions, that asks lots of relevant questions, probing questions, and then is a really good listener to your responses. So the best way to build up a successful consultation or collaboration is to make sure that your statistician understands all of the different facets of your project. And the only way that's going to happen is if they are asking you really relevant probing questions and really getting at the crux of what you're trying to study with your research project. Statisticians, I'm not sure we're always known for our written and oral communication skills, but it is really important when you're trying to collaborate with a statistician. The oral communication comes in when, we as statisticians need to be able to communicate to you what we're doing and why, because, in the maybe in the post-COVID world, you're standing in front of your poster and you're trying to tell everyone what you did, and someone asks about your statistical method. And a good statistician will have really been able to communicate that to you in a way that you can then communicate that when you're sharing your research with the world. And also when it comes to written skills, part of being a statistician is helping you write up your project, helping you write a manuscript. You should expect that your statistician is going to help you write things like the statistical method section of your paper. They should be writing most of the results section of your paper. So that's why it's really important that a statistician has those written skills. Meeting deadlines is, for obvious reasons, important, and being responsive. You want someone who's not just kind of ignoring you when you're trying to email them. Relevant research experience kind of goes into the methods. If they have relevant research experience, hopefully they have the methods that will kind of match your data set. Patient and being willing to explain statistical concepts. I kind of got to this in the oral communication part, but this has been written about, and I believe this as a statistician, that part of being a statistician is being a teacher, and we are teaching you about the different methods. We're not teaching you how to do them. We're teaching you how to understand how they're relevant to your project and how they're going to answer the question that you're asking. And, likewise, we hope that you'll teach us about the clinical relevance so that it all kind of ties together. And it's also great to have someone who respects research ethics and is going to be a member of your team, kind of having a check when it comes to research ethics, things like making sure you're not testing every single hypothesis you possibly could. You want a statistician who's going to kind of pump the brakes and make sure that we stay focused on the main research questions and the main hypotheses that we started with. So we're interested in knowing what you look for in a statistician, or if you are a statistician, what you think are really important traits. And so Sarah set up this really cool thing that this website will set up a word cloud for us. So if you go to menti.com and then you enter this code, it will ask you to provide 8 words to describe what you look for in a statistician. So I'm going to give everyone like a minute or two to do that, and then we'll go ahead and look at the word cloud. I'm going to stop sharing for a second to get it queued up.
You don't have to provide all 8. Make sure everybody has the code though before you stop sharing.
Yeah, that would be a good point.
Yeah, just provide, if you have 2 words, great, but we'll see where it goes.
Let me see if I can. Oh, I'm going to put it in the chat because
Yeah, that works.
I am just not that.
Ooh, I'm getting some results already.
Oh, cool. Not that. I give a lot of credit to all the people who are able to do all these different things while hosting a Zoom meeting. I'll give everyone like another minute or so.
I could share my screen so we can see the results come in real time. That's kind of fun.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, host disabled participant screen sharing.
I just made you co-host. You should be able
Oh, sweet. Okay. All right. Can everybody see this coming in?
I like how patient is the top one.
I know. And knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm. And communicative.
It kind of shows, I mean, the thing is, we statisticians sometimes are, we we're categorized a certain way, and I understand, but it really comes down to the soft skills too, and being able to be good communicators about research and results. And I think, having the skills to carry out the analyses, but also the communication skills to kind of translate them back to investigators is really critical.
Yeah, I very much agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, statisticians, we can all do our like analyses in our, in our little corners, but being able to communicate that so it can be communicated out to the scientific community at large in in an accurate way, especially, is so, so important. And I think it's not, surprising to anyone how in this room, probably that goes wrong all of the time, how science and research is communicated. So I do think that as statisticians, we have, some sort of responsibility.
I think we're done getting new responses, so I'm going to stop the share and let you reshare your slides, Camille.
All right, Sarah.
Oh yeah, so I guess some final thoughts just on this working relationship between a statistician and a clinical collaborator of some kind. So this, in some ways, this slide assumes you've already been working with a statistician you found somewhere, and it also might be somewhat more relevant for later career stages. I think when people are early career, one of the biggest problems they have with statistical support is just the budgetary constraints, and just getting that statistician, not because of any problems in the working relationship, but just kind of having the resources to develop that relationship in the first place. But assuming you've kind of developed a relationship, I think, thinking of your relationship with a statistician as being a relationship. It's a back and forth. It's a people sharing ideas and being team members. And when it really works the way it's supposed to, it is totally win-win for everybody involved. The statistician gets the benefit of an engaging and fulfilling collaboration, and it actually supports the statistician's own professional development. Maybe they can develop their own methodological paper off somebody's clinical data, something like that. And for the clinical investigator, their research is going to be propelled forward that much more by having a knowledgeable statistician as a member of the team. If things aren't working so great, I think on both ends, both the clinical collaborator and the statistician, I think it's, evaluating whether your expectations on communication, behavior, funding, authorship, all of those things are aligned. And if you're not getting what you need from your statistician, it's a good idea to talk to them. Related to the prior bullet, it could be that there's some miscommunication or misalignment, and kind of hashing those things out. I would say early and often, I frequently revisit things with my collaborators just to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we're communicating effectively. They're getting what they need from me and vice versa. Every once in a while when things aren't working out, it could be a fit issue. Finding a statistician is kind of akin to the mentorship relationship. So, whether you're a PhD student and you have your dissertation mentor, or if you're an early career investigator and you maybe have a mentor, a research mentor, or a career development award mentor, it's kind of the same with this. You want to find that right mentor. They have to be aligned in terms of interest, but also in terms of how you work together. And it's the same with a statistician, where if things just aren't jiving, it really just could be a lack of fit. More often, it's usually not the fit, but it's just kind of maybe some mismatch in terms of that communication. And if you're a junior biostatistician or a junior investigator, that's really, if you're having these difficulties with statistical support, that's really where you bring in a more experienced mentor to kind of help you navigate these difficult scenarios. All right, we can go to the next slide. All right, and the next two slides are to deal with this issue of authorship, because, obviously we all want to get publications. That's kind of the currency with which we do our work, whether you're a statistician or not. And so this often gets a little bit tricky. I would say in general, my best advice is that authorship discussions happen very early in the research process, so everybody kind of knows what the expectations are. Our policy at CETA, and I believe the same policy can be found pretty much with any of the statistical groups on campus. I think Accords has the same language on their website. But essentially, it's hard to imagine a situation where a biostatistician would not be considered a co-author on a manuscript. And that's because, we follow, there's this International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, and they have these guidelines regarding authorship. And pretty much any work that a statistician is going to do on a paper, running, analyses, or, editing the paper, with the design of the paper, any of those things are going to warrant authorship. So it's a really rare situation where a biostatistician wouldn't be an author on a paper. Usually it's more of a question of where in the authorship order the biostatistician should be. And this can be a little bit tricky, and there's no one right answer, and it kind of is on a case-by-case basis. We do give general guidelines on our CETA website. And I would just say, two things, like I said before, having the conversation about authorship order early in the process, and then also kind of knowing that if it's a long-term collaboration, you win some, you lose some. Sometimes, maybe a statistician is farther down than would be warranted, but then the next paper, maybe they're farther up. So it kind of balances out after a while with these longer-term collaborations. But in general, there's a biostatistician might be first author under the scenario where they play a really major role. They're playing a major role either in the project development, or they're substantially changing something in terms of the direction of the hypothesis. It's really, I would say that boils down to a statistician might be first author if the paper would not have happened without that statistician's contribution. It's something unique that statistician is doing to make that paper happen. That's a situation where you might see that statistician as a first author. A more common place for a biostatistician is in that second author position. And this is a great position for a biostatistician. It's the case where the statistician is playing a major role in the project development. They're offering their unique expertise, and they're doing the substantial bulk of the analysis, especially if it's some kind of complex analysis of data. This is kind of the typical position. I say the life cycle of a project, or if you have a statistician with unique analytic expertise. So if you bring a statistician in at the very beginning of a grant project, they're with you for 5 years on the grant. They've been super involved with all aspects of the project. Then second authorship is a fairly reasonable position for that biostatistician. Or if you bring in a statistician either as a collaborator or a consultant, because they have some sort of unique analytic expertise, you couldn't just bring in any statistician on campus. You're finding someone, maybe it's genomics, or maybe it's microbiome data, or mediation analysis, or something like that. But it's something unique about that statistician's expertise. Then second authorship is a pretty good position for that statistician. And then, kind of continue the list, any place in the middle author position, that's where the biostatistician is maybe not necessarily collaborating in all phases of the study. Maybe they come in a little bit later, but they're conducting a rigorous data analysis, writing its statistical methods section, and really playing a role with the writing of the methods and the results for publication and reviewing aspects of the paper. That's a good place for a middle author. Senior author, that's really where the biostatistician is mentoring the first author, or maybe offering guidance for the first author to conduct the analysis, or playing some kind of major role in helping the first author design the study. This isn't a common position for a junior biostatistician, but it might get more common for a biostatistician as they progress through their career a little bit more. And then a final note, according to our CETA guidelines, although we relax this all the time, if there's two statisticians on a project, so maybe there's a student who carried out the analyses, but that student is being mentored by someone else, usually you would put the mentor right after the student. Personally, I feel like these things these are just guidelines. It's a matter of discussion, a matter of coming to an understanding on these things. If I'm mentoring a student, I'm perfectly fine if the student is higher up, and then if the collaborator says, yeah, I've got to put someone else right behind the student, I'm fine taking a back seat too. So it's really kind of a back and forth between that statistician and the other people. All right, so we just had, just to get other people's thoughts, there's no kind of one right answer, but just in terms of these authorship discussions, we came up with a couple of scenarios, and we have a little poll. So in this first scenario, just interested in people's thoughts on where the statistician should be in the authorship order. So in this case, the investigator, they designed their own study, they collected their data, they provided the statistician with a fairly clean data set, but it required some wrangling, some cleaning prior to analyses. In this case, the investigator had a fairly well-defined research question, and the analyses carried out by the statistician were fairly standard regression approaches. But the biostatistician completed a very comprehensive analysis report that included all the tables, figures, and methods in interpretation, and then took that information and was able to develop appropriate manuscript-ready tables and figures, writing the data analysis section of the methods, and then writing the full results section, and then providing editing and input on the manuscript as a whole. So just curious, no right or wrong answer, but your thoughts on where the statistician might fit here. All right, yeah.
I was like, we have answers coming in. We're about half.
We still have answers coming in. Okay, I'll give it a few more seconds.
All right, I'm calling it.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I agree with the responses here. You know, there's no one right answer. I would say, yeah, absolutely. The statistician has not done enough to deserve first authorship. So, but nobody chose that. In terms of second authorship versus middle, this is a scenario. Middle would be fine for a biostatistician. You know, they weren't brought in specifically because they had unique expertise. They did do a lot of comprehensive work. They did a lot of good data analysis, but they weren't involved with the life cycle of the project, and it was a fairly standard regression. So middle authorship would be appropriate. If depending on the research team, you know, second authorship would be great, but that would be, you know, that'd be a nice gift as well. So I'd say somewhere, you know, second authorship or middle authorship would be appropriate in this place. All right. Okay. Oh, great. And so then just the second scenario, and this is the only other one we have. So in this case, this is a situation where a statistician was brought into a project specifically because the project required an analysis where they had unique expertise, and the analytic approach kind of benefited, and it might have changed because of that statistician's unique expertise. Like the previous example, the biostatistician completes a comprehensive analysis report, including all the tables, figures, interpretations, and then writes it up into a manuscript ready format and is involved with all phases of the manuscript review.
I think I'm going to end it.
Okay, perfect.
Last
Yeah,
call.
so last call. Yeah, and I definitely do agree with the distribution of responses here. I think for me, this highlights two things. I think this scenario would be one where second authorship at minimum would be kind of appropriate for a biostatistician, depending on the research team. Could, you know, if the PI was senior author, then maybe first authorship. But I think what this underscores too, the fact that we have this distribution is, there's no one right answer. Like I said, there's just guidelines, and this decision would really be a conversation amongst the full team to make sure everybody is fully on board with the plan. All right.
All right. So now we're going to shift to your meeting with your statistician for the first time, or you are a statistician meeting with someone, an investigator for the first time,
And so I think I want to prepare, things you should be prepared to answer essentially. So questions that your statistician will and should ask you. I think it's always helpful to have these questions prepped ahead of time, because then you have the answers and it can be a lot smoother interaction or consultation. So they're absolutely going to ask you your research question, and they're probably going to help you refine that into like a really answerable research question. Your statistician will always want to know about the clinical outcome, or maybe not clinical, the outcome of interest, and really specifically how it's measured, because that's going to be really important for making sure that you are collecting data that will actually measure it and then be able to do the proper analysis based on how it's measured. So for an example of this would be, if you have like a time to event outcome, that might be a little bit different methodology that you would use based on just kind of a yes/no outcome. They'll want to know what the population of interest is. So who or what are you studying? And a big question we'll ask is, have the data already been collected, or do they need to be collected? This is going to determine the timeline of your study, essentially, whether these data have already been collected or not. Also, your statistician should hopefully ask you about potential challenges with the research project that you're working on. So a big challenge would be, how common is your outcome? So for example, if you want to prospectively collect data, so collect data going forward in time, but you have a really, really rare outcome, that's going to make your study probably take longer than it is feasible to conduct a study. And so they might help you think about a different way of answering the question so that you avoid those sample size issues. Maybe you can't do a prospective study. Maybe you need to look back retrospectively in order to get enough cases in order to do the research you want to. They will also ask you about patient characteristics. I apologize, most of this is more clinically relevant than it is for more general research, but for patient characteristics that are important to account for, this is something that as a researcher, you can go dive into the literature and see what people are including in their models, because there's likely a reason why they're including those patient characteristics. Maybe there is a comorbidity that's really important for the disease that you're studying. Maybe age is really important. And so you want to make sure you have collected that list of patient characteristics, and also that you've checked to see if these factors are available. Because a lot of times they aren't. I'm working on a study right now, and there is this one, they really want to look at surgery time. And after a lot of back and forth, it looks like that's actually not available. So it's really important before you come to your consultation or before you start your project that you've really made sure that those are characteristics that are actually measured. Another thing to think about when you're looking at your research question, I think this comes up a lot when people are doing QI type projects, is making sure that sicker or stronger patients are not getting different treatment. So when we're doing QI projects, sometimes people want to look at two different treatments, but if one treatment looks worse because sicker patients are always getting that drug, that's something that you have to pay attention to, because then that means that treatment is always going to look worse. And it has nothing to do with the treatment being bad. It has to do with who's being assigned to that treatment. So different things like that are going to be questions your statistician is going to ask you. But I really would like to know, since we do have some budding statisticians in the mix, and then also some collaborators, I'm interested if anyone has questions to add to this list. If you want to add them in the chat or unmute yourself, I would love to know if there are more questions that you have asked that you think were really helpful. Lala and Sarah, you're welcome to jump in too. This is not an exhaustive list.
I guess one thing that I always want to know is sometimes people are at the beginning of phases and it might be a pilot study that they've done or preliminary data collection versus, is this like a definitive study? And you can kind of glean that if it's an R01 that someone collected data for versus a smaller grant mechanism. But even if the analysis is the same, interpretation might be different if it's intended to be a smaller study versus a bigger study of some sort, and might have different kind of standards for interpretation.
I like that one a lot. Thank you.
I also recently had an experience where like asking like what the long-term, like what the goal is to include in the manuscript, because I think a lot of the times collaborators like to think in chunks. And so like, if I analyze this chunk, if I analyze this chunk, and then I analyze this chunk, that's not necessarily the analysis that I would do for like a complete manuscript. I might choose different methods if I knew all the chunks at once. So I've started like asking my investigators, like, if we were writing this manuscript today, what would you want to include? And that helps me kind of decide which analysis method is more important or more all-encompassing.
That's a great one. I love that, because a lot of times I think people come in with like not a paper already written, but people generally have an idea about the narrative for their project. And so that's a great idea, because I think that also saves everyone time, right? Saves you the time as a statistician, because you are going to run the analyses that are really going to fit into that narrative that are most important. And, it saves the investigators time, because they don't have to write another paper. They can kind of go with the narrative they already have prepared. Those are both really good ones. Thank you, Bill. Anyone else?
I'll add one thing unless someone else wants to talk, but yeah, I guess one thing is that under that question one, what is your research question? That is such a loaded topic area. Because I think it ties into the science, but it also ties into the analysis, because I think sometimes people respond with not their research question, but kind of their broader research area. And I think if it's not well defined between the statistician and the investigator, you can end up with a situation of a lot of exploratory analysis, a lot of p-hacking, a lot of things like that. So making sure that it's a specific, not just a research question, but I like to think in terms of a specific aim, even if it's not for a grant application or it was never a grant. What is the specific aim of a given analysis?
Yeah, I agree. Research question is a loaded term. Oh, there's something in the chat.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes interdisciplinary research may require methodologies from a different field, which approach quantitative analysis differently in a nuanced way. Yeah. Thank you. So more questions that you should be prepared to answer or ask if you are the statistician are questions about your data. So even though we do like to help you do the study design, we are ultimately there at the end of the day to help you do your analysis. That's going to be where your statistician will take the lead on your project. And so for that reason, we're going to ask you a lot of questions about your data. We're going to ask if it is already existing, or if you're using EHR data versus are you doing primary data collection? Are you collecting the data yourself? They will ask if you have data, is it prospectively collected? Was it retrospectively collected in the past, or observational data? They're going to ask you how big is the population or sample. I think sample size has now come up a bunch of times in here. So it's obviously a focus of statisticians, is really thinking about the sample size so that you can make sure you can answer questions. This is the reason why this is so important, is because you don't want to waste your time or the statistician's time. You don't want to waste anyone's time or money by looking into a question if you don't have the statistical power to actually answer it. So that's where a statistician is really going to help push you to make sure you can gather enough information to actually answer your question or have a chance at answering the question. What biases might be present in your data? This is becoming talked about a lot more, which is great, because it's very important. And I think that a lot of us take for granted when we have things like EHR data, especially, that we, it's just recorded and that's it. But there's even in EHR data, there's a lot of bias. There are a lot of biases present. So things like, labs might be taken on different patients on different times based on different characteristics, and that is a bias. There is a bias based on how often some patients are going to have way more data
in an EHR than others. And that could be a bias because they're sicker. It could be a bias because they have really great insurance that pays for all of these interactions with the healthcare system. So thinking about, even how much data you have is really important. And things as simple as race. Some health systems have race self-reported from the patients, and some health systems use the triage nurse's opinion of race. So it's really important, that is a true story, that it's really important to make sure you think about these different biases, especially if you're going to look into someone like the sociodemographic characteristics of your patients, for example. You want to make sure that the data you have measure relevant patient characteristics and confounders. I just kind of brought up this example, but you want to make sure that if you are asking a question and you're using EHR data, for example, that the components you need to answer that question actually exist in that record. And is there a significant amount of missing data? Missing data is, I would say it's kind of like a loaded term for statisticians, but it's a big issue. It's an issue in EHR data. It's an issue in prospectively collected data. It's a huge issue in survey data. And there's not always elegant ways to deal with it depending on what type of missing data you have. So that can start to get really, really complicated. Number one, if you have a lot of missing data, and number two, if it becomes kind of like an informed missingness, there's a reason why that data are missing. Those data are missing. And the biggest question we will ask you probably though is how long it will take to acquire or collect these data, because I think people always underestimate how long it's going to take to collect data or even just get it from EHR. So even, Compass is incredibly busy. They have a really long list of people who want data. And so it's important to be prepared to think about how long it's going to take to get your data, because that is going to determine the timeline of your project. So that is a really big question that your statistician will ask and want to know, and probably the first one that they will ask you. So are there any other questions that people would add to this list? Anything that, for the statisticians in the room, things you want to know about people's data, or I don't know, things, if you're not a statistician, things you would want people to ask you about your data? Yeah, I came up with an exhaustive list. I'm very impressive. Well, I'll say that, this is such a big topic that even on our CETA website, I don't know if this is really, anyways, it says what's in your data. Like that's the big question that we want to know as statisticians, especially as collaborative statisticians. Like at the end of the day, that's like one of our biggest goals, is to kind of figure out what's in your data and help you see what's in your data.
And I guess one quick thing, someone might know, they might know the level of missing data, might know these things, but part of it is then it's the back and forth. They might not know how much missing data is there, especially if it comes from an EHR. So that's where then the statistician does an initial data, initial peek at the data to do some descriptive exploratory analysis and says, oh, did you know that for this variable, 40% of people are missing a value? Does that sound right to you? Is there some reason for that? So then it begins the back and forth.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I feel like that happens a lot, is your statistician will probably ask you to spot, and as a statistician, you should kind of like, I always like to run frequencies, see what's in there, and then hand it back to my collaborator and say, do these numbers make sense? Do these ranges make sense? Are some of these things possible? They seem like outliers. So it's a really good one. Anyone else? Well, that is kind of the end of our content, but since CETA is the sponsor, I'm doing a shameless plug for CETA. So we exist. We love to collaborate and consult on your projects. And if you think you're interested in statistical support, then you can come to our website and click on Connect with Us. And then there's a couple of different ways that you can connect with a statistician within CETA. So the Transform Your Project is kind of that the consulting situation where you have like a well-defined project, and you're looking for a statistician to either help you, do the analyses for that project, or maybe you really need some intensive study design help, things like that. This is where our consulting arm lives. You can build a partnership. So this kind of falls into the realm of, if you need a statistician to help serve as the primary statistician on a grant, for example, or if you are interested in, if your division or department is interested in having a statistician kind of embedded in your research team. We do offer grant development support. We ask that you come at least 60 days before your grant is due, but this is actually a free service that we provide. Is we provide a certain number of hours of grant support to help you write that statistical method section and make sure that your grant is set up for success and what you want to achieve and what your methods, your statistical methods say you're going to actually look into. And then the final option is our 1 hour consults, which again are free, but they're set up to be about like 1 or 2 every 60 days. And this is Sarah's 5-minute question. But because we know that it usually takes about an hour. And so we do have these if you have like 1 or 2 really specific questions about maybe something that you're working on, or you're kind of stuck coding something. This is a really good resource to take advantage of and that we offer through CETA. And if you have any other questions for us, but this is kind of a shy group today, so I'll say our emails are here and you're always welcome to reach out if you have other questions about CETA or working with a statistician, anything like that. And, oh yeah, thank you, Lala. So the slides have been added to the GitHub, and our final slide, we hope you'll connect with us with CETA. We have a Twitter account, which is pretty active, and then we also have a LinkedIn account. So I guess thank you so much for attending Data Week. This is kind of the last Stats Talk, I think, right? So yeah, so thank you for coming in. And we do a lot of like short course content and things like that. So if you're interested in more of CETA's offerings, especially educational offerings, please connect with us. And we share kind of all of those different courses and things like that along the way. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And I'll pass it back to Lala for the last word.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. This afternoon, we have the kickoff for Stats Fest. If you're interested and didn't register already, we do have more room. Stats Fest is basically a coding competition that goes from tonight until Saturday around 2 p.m. We have microbiome data. So all the little bugs that live in the lungs is how I think about the data that we're working with. And we have both statistical research questions and data management tasks that you can basically choose your own adventure with what you'll be doing. And you'll be paired with a biostatistician from CETA or from the Department of Biostatistics and Informatics. And there are really cool prizes. First place will win like a Garmin Forerunner, like an active watch. Second place gets wireless headphones, whether you're an iPhone user or Android, whatever the other ones that exist are. I'm a solid Apple person, sorry. And then third place will get e-readers. So you can participate either as an individual or as a team, whatever you prefer. And we'd love to have you. If you want to join, feel free to email me and I'll add you to our roster. Yeah, thank you guys for coming.
Thank you. And thanks, Sarah, for doing this with me.
Thanks, everybody.